Hello there. My name is Diana Morris, and I am a clarity coach who essentially helps folks with the next steps of their life. So I specialize in decision making, utilizing untapped resources, and really taking action and making decisions with clarity and intention. And I'm also one of the mentor coaches for SA Pro to CEO. So I'm really excited to be speaking with you today all about the ROI on your decisions, right? So the return on your investment of the decisions you take, or the decisions you make rather, and the actions you take. Right before this, I was actually watching The Bachelorette. So if you are part of Bachelor Nation, you know that our lead is currently in the midst of a lot of decisions, and she's really trying to have to figure out how can something that she knows right now, what does that mean for the rest of her life? How do the decisions she's going to be making over the next few days, weeks, hours, because the show is very weird, but how do those decisions really impact her day-to-day moving forward? And while this is not, reality TV, we also have to make decisions where we don't know the outcome all of the time, where we're not quite sure what comes next. So I want to speak with you a little bit about how to make the best of what you have and make the types of decisions that increase the return on your investment, and also how to pivot and adjust if you're not getting what you think you need, or things don't work out the way that you hoped they would have. When I talk about the ROI on our decisions, I'm really speaking about the outcome that we get. And I know a lot of times when I'm working with folks and I'm working with my clients, even with myself, a lot of times people feel as though they're stuck or they don't know what decision to make and they're not quite sure how to move forward. And more times than not, it's not the actual decision that is difficult, right? You're aware of what your choices are. You're aware of what your options are. You're likely not quite sure what's going to be on the other side of that. You're not quite sure if you're going to be able to handle the outcome of what happens. You're not quite sure if you're going to be able to handle the fallout if things don't go the way they hope or you hoped. Or you're not quite sure to really relish in the victory that comes up because your sights are on the next big thing. Well, if I get this, what comes next? What else should I be doing? So I want to start with that reality because it's important to recognize that. It's important to understand that sometimes when we're feeling stuck, when we're feeling as though we're not quite sure what our next move needs to be, it's not so much the act of the decision itself. It's the way our imagination is working to figure out, well, if this thing happens, then what comes next? And having that balance, knowing that, allows you to start forecasting. Well, if this thing works, what would my next move be? If it doesn't work, what other options do I have? A little bit about myself. So I am, in addition to a coach, in addition to working with the SA Pro to CEO organization, I am also a higher ed professional. So I work in student accountability, which, as you can imagine, makes me one of the most popular people on a college campus. So I speak with students daily, right, about their decision making. I speak to students daily about the regrets they may have from Friday night, from the weekend, as they're sitting and speaking with me on a Wednesday afternoon. And one of the things I always talk with my students about is, how do you move gracefully through what happened, right? You can't go back and change time, right? You can't go back and undo what you did. But now that you know what this outcome looks like, now that you know how this outcome feels, what can you take from this moment to help inform the decisions you make moving forward? You've invested your time and energy into a thing. You now know what the outcome of that thing is. So how can you use that and carry it into all the things that come ahead of you? How do you make different types of decisions? How do you make the same types of decisions? That's really some of the thought processes that I, encourage my students to think about. And I want to bring it to you as you're a professional, as you are someone who is looking at the next chapter of your life. Now that you know what you know, what comes next? If you've been making decisions, if you've been taking actions that you're either thrilled with, how can you repeat that? How can you keep that momentum going? If you've made decisions and you're seeing the results of your actions that you're like, you know what, this isn't working out anymore. What can you change, right? This doesn't necessarily need to be, you just start from scratch and blow everything up and start your life over again. For some people, that might be it. For other folks, it might just be, all right, you pick up the phone and you call a friend that you haven't spoken to in a long time and tell them, how are you doing? What's new with you? Here's what I'm thinking of. Do you have any connections that I can tap into to help get me to the next point? It might be as simple, quote unquote, simple as, signing up for a workout plan if you're trying to improve your health in another way. A lot of times we think that in order to get something big, we need to take gigantic leaps, and we overlook the small steps that come along the way. We overlook the little investments that we can make that will have huge returns on the back end when we're keeping up with that consistency. Another thing that I want to speak to when it comes to, the return on our investment, when it comes to our decisions, is the sunk cost fallacy. And this is where I want to spend the majority of my time because it's something that I see come up time and time and time again. So using my own life as an example, like I mentioned, I'm in higher ed. So that means, I did the whole grad school thing, did the whole undergrad things, got the loans to show for it. And it's very easy to feel as though, and I felt this way for a long time, that because I invested all of that time and that energy and those monetary values into my degrees, into this industry, into this job, that I need to see it through, right? If I were to change my mind, if I were to pivot, that is some sign that I've lost, or I did it wrong, or I made the wrong decision, or I didn't quite know myself, or I'm flighty, or all of the things, right? And what I've really had to learn and trust and believe and give myself permission to realize is, says who, right? Says who? I get to choose what comes next for me. I can't undo the time that I've invested. I can't undo the energy I've put into it. But why on earth would I continue to invest time and energy into something that I'm recognizing may not be working out the way that I want it to? Case in point, to kind of paint the picture for you. So my first real world job out of graduate school, real world job, was in housing because, my sights were on being a university president or being a dean of students. I know more now, so those are no longer my career aspirations. But back in the day when I was, really gung-ho about this whole higher ed thing, that's what I wanted to do. And in looking at all of the job descriptions, having conversations with mentors, just seeing kind of the trajectory that people went on, I saw that typically they have some type of crisis response experience. They have some type of conduct. They have some type of housing. They start in that entry-level position that we all know and love. So I got the job out of grad school, was really excited to be graduating with a job, moving to a great city, having a great position that on paper was everything that I wanted it to be. So I pack up my belongings, move across the country by myself, solo dolo, settle in, and I'm like, this is great. And it was, right? Don't get me wrong. I was enjoying my job. I was doing it really well. But as time went on, I started to realize that it wasn't quite what I imagined it to be. Now, the job description was pretty accurate as it can be as it could be. I knew, the on-call rotation, I knew the supervision responsibilities, the advising responsibilities, all of these things. But the lived experience just it wasn't what I needed in my life at that point. However, because I, again, had invested all of that time and energy, I had told people this is what I'm going to be doing, I convinced myself that I needed to stick it out. So in January 2016 at this point, I remember being so frustrated. I got an email that was ridiculous at a ridiculous hour of the night. And I read it and I was very frustrated after seeing it. And I was like, this is it, I'm done. So I prepared a resignation letter. Then I saved the letter to my desktop and I went to sleep. And then I went back to work the next day, went back in the next day, and I kept going back because again, I committed to this thing. I said I was going to do it, so I was going to see it through. After all, I was doing a good job. My supervisor was telling me I was doing a good job. My colleagues were telling me I was doing a good job. My students were I had things I needed to do. And flash forward to April that same year, so about 4 months after, my little resignation moment, I get called into a meeting. I get a meeting placed on my calendar, as often happens. And then I go in and it's some random lady I'd never seen before with like the senior vice president of the division. And they, long story short, informed me that the reorg that was going on was complete. And as part of the reorganization, my position was being eliminated. So if you know anything about housing, you know that April is like right around move out time. It's right around finals. You know that most of the conferences are now done. The hiring season isn't really as flush as it would have been any other time. And I was just like, oh, okay. I don't know what I don't quite remember what I was thinking in that moment. I think I kind of blacked out from it because with that elimination of my position, I would no longer have a job. I would no longer have a place to live because housing was part of the position. So took my letter, said, okay, hear you loud and clear. And I went back to my office and I continued to send emails and I continued to prepare for meetings. And I always share this story as kind of my origin story, right? Because again, I wrote the letter back in January. I knew in my gut that where I wasn't quite where I needed to be. I knew that, I felt it, but I didn't trust it because I was believing, I was sticking to, and I was stuck on the idea that because I had invested X already, to stop now would be a loss. That is the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy essentially says that it's more difficult to stop doing something when you've already invested time and energy into it already, because you're considering everything that came before a loss, right? As opposed to realizing that you still have things in front of you. So to quickly summarize, the story worked out very well because here I am today in a position that I was very strategic and very thoughtful of. I used that experience to let me know and be honest with myself about what I liked in my position, what I didn't like, what I would no longer put up with, what I was willing to sacrifice. And I was able to get a full-time position, the one I'm in now, in conduct, that adds to my life as opposed to taking away from it. And it also taught me how to advocate for myself and how to be honest with myself to myself. Because at the end of the day, it is my responsibility to create and protect the life I want to live. And sometimes the creation and protection of that life means that I need to say enough. It means I need to change my mind. It means I need to give myself permission to use my imagination to think of what else is possible for me. Because truth be told, if I had not been laid off, if that reorg had not happened, I wouldn't have left the position in the time that I did. I would have eventually left, I like to think, but I was in it to win it. I was gonna stick it through because again, for me, someone else's mission, vision, goals were more important than my own personal mission, vision, goals, because I hadn't given myself time to think about who am I outside of my degree? Who am I outside of my job title? Who am I outside of the product that I can give and produce to this organization? And, this isn't anything against them. They did what they had to do. That is their job to maintain the efficiency and the longevity of what they've got going on. And it's my job to maintain and sustain the efficiency and longevity of me as a human. So bringing it back to the return on your investment in your decisions. If this were an English class, I would have us sit down and look at all the foreshadowing moments in that story I shared. But again, the gut check was there. I felt the twinge. I felt the twinge enough to write a resignation letter in the middle of the night. But then I stopped myself. That's a decision. When you're saying, I'm just going to wait to see what happens, that's a decision. When you opt out of making a choice, that's making a choice. It's making a choice and it's making the decision to give someone else full control over the outcome that impacts you. Sometimes it works out, right? Sometimes waiting and seeing works out in your favor. Sometimes it doesn't. The question that I want to put to you is, what are you opting out of in your life? What are you saying, because I've invested X, Y, Z so far, I'm going to see it through, even when you know that what you currently have isn't working out the way that you would like it to, or it's not working out as well as it could possibly work out. This might be in your career. This could be in a relationship. This can be with your, financial situation, whatever the case may be. What is it for you? And if you're able to identify something, how much longer is it going to continue? What needs to change for you to change, for the situation to change? That is the type of investment that you're making, because at the end of the day, you're here, right? Lord willing, or whatever entity or deity, if you choose to believe, you get to wake up each day, and there's a certain amount of time that we have. So the energy and the time is going to be spent somewhere. Why not spend it in a place that feels good, right? Why not spend it in a way that is real and true for you? And this isn't to say, that it's always going to be butterflies and roses and all of that stuff, because no, that's not how life works. It is to say, of the things you can control, are you taking as much control as possible? Are you leveraging all of the things that you can? Because convincing yourself that you need to stick it out, sure, that is one way to do it. But there are also other possibilities and other options. So what do those options look like for you? Because again, choosing to not make a decision is in itself making a decision. And one thing that I, speak to my clients about, and I talk to folks about in the program, is the idea of permission. And one way of looking at it is, what do you consider to be the cost of admission for your life? Do you think that in order to live the life you want, live a life of some type of sustainability or some type of enjoyment or some type of worth and value, that you need to struggle, that you need to sacrifice 24/7, that you need to constantly be producing and working to prove some type of value? Or do you subscribe to the belief that you are allowed to change your mind whenever you want? That you can try something, see if it works, and then pivot if needed? What is the cost of admission for your life? And who gets to determine what that cost is? So this was a quick one. I wanted to, again, come here and really throw some questions at you. Throw the questions of, what are you investing in so far? What does that investment look like? I know for me that I've put a lot of my investments so far financially into higher education, right? Because degrees, yay. All those things that we need in order to prove our ability to execute certain tasks for an organization. Things that we need to have in order to prove ourselves worthy of certain titles and salary levels and all of that. And another investment, as I continue to make that investment, I continue to choose to use my skills and talents for an organization to help them meet their goals. I'm also using my skills and talents for my own life, in my own life, by investing in my business, by working with coaches, by having conversations with people, by being in community with others who are also choosing to opt out of that stale narrative of it needs to look this way. Choosing to surround myself with people who also understand that we get to choose the cost of admission for our own life. And again, this is not a call to, throw everything out, because that's not realistic, nor is that necessary. It is a call, it's a invitation to really sit down and think, well, what is the return on investment so far for the decisions that you've made? And what has been the return so far on the decisions you've opted out of? If you need an example of that, think back to me typing fiercely with my little letter in January, and then getting a different type of letter in April. And even in that situation, it was, taking the time to be pissed, to be upset, to be devastated, to feel worthless in some ways because my identity was tied to that role. But also to come out of that and realize, okay, that's the worst that can happen, right? That is the greatest fear happening there. So now what do I do outside of that? What do I do on the other side of that? How do I make the most of it? Because again, Lord willing, I'm going to wake up tomorrow. So what decisions am I going to make this time around to better align me with the life I want to live? That is what I have for you. Again, several questions that percolate through your mind. I would love to hear any thoughts, comments, questions you have as you've been listening to this, as you've been watching this, what comes to mind. Definitely reach out. Again, drop them in the chat and I will circle back to them. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me, SA Prito CEO, which I've mentioned a couple of times during this. Again, I'm one of the mentor coaches. We are currently enrolling folks. So if you are in a position where you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I use my skills, talents, experiences into something that is mine, something that I've created, something that I'm going to advance in addition to or outside of what you may be doing in your full-time role, part-time role, whatever the case may be. We would love to have you join us. Feel free to share any questions you may have about that program. I'm happy to answer them as well. So enjoy the rest of your day and have a good one.